pray. May I speak in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please do be seated. Good morning. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you all today. This Sunday marks the end of my month on placement at this church, but I thought in case I hadn't had a chance to speak with you personally, I'd briefly introduce myself. So my name is Grace. I grew up in a vicarage. My dad's a vicar, and I grew up with him, my mum, my brother Fred, and my sister Ruby, and we also have a golden Labrador called Goku. And whilst reading this passage that we just heard from Luke, I couldn't help but be reminded a little bit of my dog. Bear with me. Often there are times when my dad will go out and Goku will sit there intently in the window, waiting for any sound that might indicate his return. At times like this, Goku is on high alert, waiting for the return of my dad, his master. Like my dog waiting for his dad to return, Jesus speaks of those who eagerly await his return, calling them blessed. Jesus is encouraging his followers to be attentive to God at all times, and though he uses quite a striking comparison of his return as being like a thief in the night, Jesus doesn't want this watchful nature to be one out of fear. The first 4 words that Jesus speaks in this gospel reading are, "Do not be afraid." Instead, we are to be attentive to God at all times out of love for him, knowing that he delights to give us good things and that we have an unfailing treasure in heaven. It's all well and good saying this, but it's easier said than done. There are all kinds of things in our external world around us and in the internal world of our minds that can make it quite difficult for us to be attentive on God. I recently decided to downgrade my phone to a basic Nokia phone as this one, and it doesn't do very much except calls and texts. There's no internet, so barely any form of entertainment at all. It does have the Snake game though, which I play a lot. So I was very excited to find out that it can play the radio. Sometimes the signal is very strong and the music comes through really clearly, but other times all I can hear is a really loud muffling noise as I flick through the channels really impatiently with no success. In my experience, this is what being attentive to God sometimes can feel like. In our world today, there is quite a lot that can get in the way of God's signal. There's just the busyness and noise of everyday life, with an increasing amount of this existing online in the form of things like social media. But there are also issues of mental health, with people suffering from anxiety and depression, and where they feel that their own thoughts are against them. And it can be hard to separate the constant streams of information, opinions, and thoughts from that of God. All of these things make it hard to be attentive to God. So one of the ways I personally find God is in the silence. Silence can often be thought of as quite a passive activity, but it isn't always the case, and in fact waiting on God isn't always passive at all. In the passage we heard from Luke, Jesus calls his listeners to be dressed for action and to have their lamps lit. This language used is rather more active than passive, when describing the alert nature of those who wait upon the Lord. In my experience, it can quite often be hard to find silence in the world and even in church settings. And so I appreciate when this is incorporated into worship. Earlier this year, I attended a Good Friday service at my home church, and myself and other congregation members heard a series of reflections of the account of the death and burial of Jesus. Each reflection was broken up by a period of silence, which was left for personal reflection. My dad gave the final reflection after we'd heard the account of the burial of Jesus. And I remember him saying at the very beginning when he started his reflection that he was hesitant to even speak at all. He spoke of the value of just sitting there and allowing the gravity of what we'd heard to sink in. That in a world full of opinions and noise, sometimes silence is what is needed to allow God to break through. Though I myself have never heard God audibly in silence, I do believe that something can happen when you open yourself up to God in this way. Not everyone finds God in silence though, and I think it's wonderful that this church has an environment where families are welcome and noise is welcome too. And there are many ways to be attentive to the presence of God. Here at St. Martin's, something that I've come to really appreciate has been the way that we sing the Lord's Prayer. I find it a lot more prayerful than simply saying it, and it's actually been a joy to hear your faith so clearly expressed when you sing this prayer to one another and to God. Prayer is a key way for us to be more attentive to the call of God on our lives. And rather than it just being about us asking God to do things, prayer is a way for us to be more open to what God is doing already. During my time here, I've been greatly impressed by how the group of mine churches work together to enable mission in Byker and Walker. I think this is a sign of how attentive you are being to God and to the needs of your local community. So I hope this serves as an encouragement to you all to continue to open yourselves up to God, both as individuals and as the wider church. Not out of fear or guilt, but out of knowledge of the love God has for you. By doing this, you are seeking to make his heavenly treasure known to all, thus building his kingdom here on earth. In closing, I'd just like to go back to the analogy I used at the beginning of my dog. Though my dog is older now, he's about 8 years old. And he knows now that when my dad goes out, he will eventually come home. It's thought that puppies don't have the same level of understanding. When their masters leave, puppies genuinely don't know whether they'll return or not. That's why they bound so much when they come back home. For us, though, it isn't like this. And though we don't know when, we can rest in the assurance that Jesus will return to bring in his kingdom. So may we live lives that reflect this glorious truth. Amen.